Dr. Amanda Chen had always prided herself on knowing everything that happened in her hospital. As chief of emergency medicine at Metropolitan General, she commanded respect from everyone who walked through those sliding glass doors. Everyone except the night shift janitor who'd been mopping the same floors for 12 years. Henry Washington was 67 years old, moved slowly, and spoke even slower. He arrived every evening at 10 p.m. sharp, pushing his cart through the sterile hallways with the same methodical precision he'd maintained for over a decade. The younger nurses called him Ghost because he seemed to appear and disappear without anyone noticing. What Dr. Chen didn't know was that Henry had once been Dr. Henry Washington, trauma surgeon, decorated Army medic, and the man who'd saved more lives in Vietnam than anyone had bothered to count. That was before the drinking started. Before the malpractice lawsuit, that wasn't his fault, but destroyed his reputation anyway. Before his wife left and took their daughter with her. Before he lost his medical license and spent 15 years trying to find himself at the bottom of a bottle. The transformation from respected surgeon to invisible janitor had been gradual, like watching the tide slowly erase footprints in the sand. But Henry had been sober for 8 years now, and every night as he cleaned these halls, he listened. He watched. He remembered things that others had forgotten. Dr. Chan first noticed him during the chaos of a multi-car accident 3 months ago. While she was barking orders and nurses were running between trauma bays, she caught a glimpse of Henry in the corner, quietly cleaning up broken glass from a dropped 4-bag. But his eyes weren't on his mop. They were tracking the monitors, following the rhythm of machines, watching everything with an intensity that seemed out of place for someone whose job was to make floors shine. "Excuse me," she had said, stepping toward him. "Could you clean this up later? We need the space." Henry had nodded silently, gathered his supplies, and disappeared into the background. But not before Dr. Chen saw something flicker across his face. Not annoyance or frustration, but something that looked almost like medical concern. She dismissed the thought. After all, what would a janitor know about medical emergencies? Tonight would be different. Tonight, Dr. Chen would discover that the most important person in her hospital was someone she'd never really seen at all. It was 2:47 a.m. when the ambulance sirens started wailing in the distance. Dr. Chen was reviewing charts in her office, trying to catch up on paperwork that never seemed to end. The emergency radio crackled to life with words that made her blood run cold. "Metropolitan General, we have a code black incoming. Multiple casualties from an apartment fire. 7 victims, including 3 children. ETA 4 minutes. Repeat, code black." Code black, mass casualty event. The kind of night that tested everyone's limits and sometimes broke them. Dr. Chin sprinted toward the emergency bay, her mind already calculating resources, staff, and space. The night shift was always thinner, but they'd have to make it work. They always did. The first ambulance arrived with a family of 4. The father was unconscious, suffering from severe smoke inhalation. The mother was conscious but badly burned on her arms and legs. Their 2 children, ages 6 and 8, were crying and coughing, but seemed stable. "Bay 3 for the father," Dr. Chen shouted over the chaos. "Get respiratory up here now. Bay 1 for the mother, and take the kids to pediatrics for evaluation." The second ambulance brought an elderly man in cardiac arrest and a teenage girl with what looked like a severe head injury. Dr. Chen's team was already stretched thin, but they were handling it. Barely. That's when the third ambulance arrived. "We've got 2 more," the paramedic called out as they wheeled in the stretcher. "This one's bad." 23-year-old male fell from a 3rd-story window trying to escape the fire. Possible internal bleeding, definitely has a pneumothorax, and... He paused, looking at his chart. "We lost his pulse twice on the way in." Dr. Chen looked around the emergency department. Every bay was full. Every nurse was occupied. The surgical team was already working on the cardiac arrest patient. Her residents were overwhelmed, and she could see the fear creeping into their eyes. "Bay 5, she called out, but she knew it was hopeless. Bay 5 was the smallest trauma bay, barely equipped for major surgery. The kind of internal injuries this patient likely had would require a full team, and the nearest available surgeon was 20 minutes away. As they wheeled the patient into Bay 5, Dr. Chin caught a glimpse of something that made her pause. Henry was there, mopping in the corner, but he'd stopped working entirely. He was staring at the patient with the same intense focus she'd noticed months ago. "Henry, I need you to clear out," she said, rushing to the patient's side. "We need all the space we can get." But Henry didn't move. He was looking at the monitors, at the patient's chest, at the way his breathing was labored and uneven. "Doctor," he said quietly, his voice so soft she almost missed it. "That's not pneumothorax." Dr. Chin froze. She turned to look at him, really look at him, for the first time in years. His eyes were focused, alert, and completely serious. "Excuse me?" Breathing pattern, the positioning of the chest, that's not pneumothorax. That's tension pneumothorax. And if you don't decompress it in the next 2 minutes, he's going to die. The words hit her like a physical blow. Not because a janitor was giving her medical advice, but because she looked at the patient again and realized he was right. The signs were subtle, but they were there. The slight shift in the trachea, the way the chest wasn't rising evenly, the pattern of distress that she'd somehow missed in the chaos. "Who are you?" she whispered. Henry looked at her for a long moment, then set down his mop and walked to the sink to wash his hands. "I'm someone who's done this before. And if you don't move right now, this boy is going to die while we're having this conversation." Dr. Chin's mind was racing. Everything in her training told her to call security to get this man away from her patient. But something in his voice, in his eyes, in the way he moved toward the patient with careful, practiced steps told her to trust him. "What do you need?" she heard herself ask. 14-gauge needle, alcohol swabs, and about 30 seconds of faith." She handed him the supplies, her hands shaking slightly. Henry cleaned the injection site with the same methodical precision he used to clean floors, but now his movements had a different quality. These weren't the hands of someone who'd spent 12 years pushing a mop. These were surgeon's hands. He inserted the needle between the patient's ribs, and immediately there was a rush of air. The patient's chest fell, his breathing eased, and the monitors showed an immediate improvement in his vital signs. "Now you can treat the pneumothorax properly," Henry said, stepping back. "But you've got bigger problems. The internal bleeding isn't from a ruptured spleen like you're thinking. Look at the pattern of bruising on his left side. That's liver laceration, and it's bad. You need to get him to, or immediately." Dr. Chin stared at him, her mind trying to process what had just happened. "How do you know all this?" Henry picked up his mop again, but his eyes never left the patient. "Because 20 years ago, I was you. Dr. Henry Washington, trauma surgery, before I lost everything that mattered." The next 30 minutes were a blur of controlled chaos. Henry quietly guided Dr. Chin through decisions that saved not just the young man's life, but helped her reorganize her entire approach to the mass casualty event. He never took credit, never stepped into the spotlight, but his presence made everything work better. When the last patient was stabilized and the emergency department finally grew quiet, Dr. Chin found Henry in the hallway, back to mopping floors as if nothing had happened. "We need to talk," she said. Henry nodded slowly. "I figured we might." They sat in her office as the sun was beginning to rise, 2 cups of coffee growing cold between them. Henry told her about Vietnam, about the lives he'd saved and the ones he couldn't, about coming home to a country that didn't want to hear about war, about medical school and residency, and the years when he was at the top of his profession. He told her about the night everything changed. A car accident, a child who died despite everything he did right, and a family who sued him for malpractice. Even though he was eventually cleared, the legal battle destroyed his reputation, his marriage, and his faith in himself. "I started drinking to forget," he said quietly. "But alcohol doesn't let you forget. It just makes you not care about remembering." Dr. Chin listened without interrupting. Watching this man who'd been invisible to her for years transform into someone entirely different. Not because he'd changed, but because she was finally seeing him clearly. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" she asked. "Why work as a janitor when you could have tried to get your license back?" Henry was quiet for a long moment. "Because I didn't trust myself anymore. Because I thought if I could learn to take care of simple things, like keeping floors clean, maybe someday I could learn to take care of complicated things again, like people. And now? Now I know that taking care of people isn't something you forget. It's something you are." Dr. Chin made a decision that morning that changed everything. She called the medical board, the hospital administration, and her contacts at the state licensing department. Henry's case was complicated, but not impossible. His license had been suspended, not revoked, and with the right documentation and support, he could potentially practice again. The process took 6 months of paperwork, psychological evaluations, and supervised practice. During that time, Henry continued working as a janitor during the day and studied for his recertification exams at night. Dr. Chen became his unofficial mentor, and slowly, other staff members began to learn his story. Not everyone was supportive. Dr. Marcus Webb, the head of surgery, made his disapproval clear during a staff meeting. "I don't care what he did 20 years ago," Dr. Webb said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "The man is a janitor. He's been mopping floors for 12 years. You can't just transform someone back into a surgeon because they had a good night." Dr. Chen felt the familiar anger rising in her chest, but before she could respond, Henry spoke up from the back of the room. "Dr. Webb is right," he said quietly. "You can't transform someone back into a surgeon, but you can rediscover that they never stopped being one." The room fell silent. Henry walked to the front, moving with the same careful dignity he'd shown that night in the emergency department. "I haven't been mopping floors for 12 years," he continued. "I've been learning humility. I've been learning that the most important part of medicine isn't the surgery or the diagnosis or the degree on the wall. It's the willingness to serve." He paused, looking around the room at faces that had ignored him for years. "Every night for 12 years, I've walked these halls. I've seen nurses stay late to hold the hand of a dying patient. I've watched residents cry in supply closets after losing someone they couldn't save. I've seen doctors like Dr. Chen make impossible decisions with grace and skill that would humble anyone." His voice grew stronger. "You want to know what I learned mopping floors? I learned that medicine isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about being the most willing to serve the person who needs you most." Dr. Webb was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked, "What makes you think you can handle the pressure of surgery again?" Henry smiled, and for the first time since Dr. Chen had known him, he looked like the confident surgeon he'd once been. "Because I've been under pressure every day for 12 years. The pressure of being invisible, the pressure of being judged, the pressure of rebuilding yourself one floor at a time. Surgery is just another kind of pressure, and I've been preparing for it longer than anyone realizes." 6 months later, Dr. Henry Washington performed his first surgery in over 20 years. It was a routine appendectomy, but the gallery was packed with staff members who'd come to witness something they'd never seen before, a janitor becoming a surgeon. The operation was flawless. Henry's hands moved with the same precision he'd once used to clean floors, but now they were saving lives instead of just making them shine. After the surgery, Dr. Chen found him in the locker room sitting quietly on the bench. "How does it feel?" she asked. Henry looked up at her, and she saw tears in his eyes. "Like coming home," he said. "Like finding out that the person I thought I'd lost was just waiting for me to be ready to find him again." The story of Dr. Henry Washington spread quickly through the hospital, then through the medical community, and eventually to the press. But Henry never sought the spotlight. He preferred to work quietly, taking the difficult cases that others avoided, mentoring young residents, and treating every patient with the same dignity he'd learned during his years of invisibility. Dr. Chin often thought about that night when everything changed, not just because it saved lives, but because it taught her something about seeing people clearly, about recognizing that worth isn't always visible, that talent can be hidden in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the most important person in the room is the one everyone else has stopped noticing. Henry continued to arrive at work every day with the same quiet determination he'd shown as a janitor. But now, instead of pushing a mop, he was saving lives. Instead of being invisible, he was exactly where he belonged. The hospital created a new program based on Henry's story, designed to help healthcare workers who'd fallen on hard times find their way back to medicine. They called it the Second Chance Initiative, and Henry became its first director. Everyone deserves a second chance, he said during the program's launch. But first, they have to believe they deserve it themselves. Dr. Chen was promoted to chief of staff the following year, and she made sure that Henry's story was told to every new employee who walked through the doors of Metropolitan General. Not as inspiration, but as a reminder that the most important thing in medicine isn't what you know, but how willing you are to serve others. Years later, when people asked her about the night that changed everything, Dr. Chin would smile and say, "I didn't save anyone that night. I just learned to see someone who'd been there all along." Henry Washington had spent 12 years being invisible, but he'd never stopped being a healer. He'd just been waiting for the right moment to heal himself. The last time Dr. Chen saw Henry, he was training a new resident in the trauma bay. The young doctor was struggling with a difficult case, and Henry was standing beside him, quietly offering guidance. "Remember," Henry said, his voice calm and steady, "the most important tool in medicine isn't in your hands, it's in your heart. Everything else is just technique." As Dr. Chen watched them work together, she realized that Henry had been teaching that lesson for 12 years. Not with words, but with his actions. Not as a surgeon, but as a man who'd learned that true healing begins with humility, grows through service, and finds its greatest expression in the willingness to help others become their best selves. The janitor who became a surgeon had always been both. He just needed time to remember and someone